The grand ballroom of Ashford House fell silent as a single scream pierced the air. Lady Pemberton's diamond necklace, a family heirloom worth more than most estates, had vanished. All eyes turned to the trembling girl in the corner, her worn dress a stark contrast to the silk and satin surrounding her. She was nobody, a charity case invited out of piety. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. But before the constable could be summoned, a deep voice cut through the whispers. "I will not stand by while an innocent is condemned without evidence." The Duke of Ravensmere had spoken. What no one knew, not even the Duke himself, was that the girl he defended carried a secret that would shatter the foundations of England's most powerful families. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has travelled. The autumn of 1883 brought an unusual chill to London, settling over Mayfair like a silk shroud. Inside the drawing-room of Ashford House, Eleanor Hartwell sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap as they had been taught to rest, never fidgeting, never revealing the turmoil beneath. At 22, she possessed the kind of beauty that painters attempted to capture but never quite managed. Dark auburn hair that caught the firelight, eyes the colour of winter moss, and a delicate frame that belied an inner strength she had learned to suppress. "You understand the honour being bestowed upon you," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. She was Eleanor's guardian, a distant cousin who had taken her in after the tragedy that had left Eleanor orphaned at 15. The word guardian suggested protection, but Eleanor had long since learned it meant something closer to ownership. "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "Lord Ashford's family is one of the oldest in England. His late wife was a Cavendish. The match is far above what you could have hoped for, given your circumstances." The pause before that final word was deliberate, a reminder of Eleanor's precarious position in society. She was gentry, barely, with no fortune and no family to speak of. The Hartwells had once been respectable, but her father's mysterious death and her mother's subsequent decline had left Eleanor with nothing but a name that meant less with each passing year. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window where rain had begun to streak the glass. Somewhere beyond those panes was a world she had once known. A childhood filled with her father's laughter, her mother's gentle songs, and the sprawling estate in Derbyshire that had been her home. But that world had been torn away, replaced by this gilded cage where every breath was measured, every word weighed. "Lord Ashford will arrive at 7, Mrs. Pemberton continued, rising from her chair with the rustle of expensive taffeta. "You will wear the blue silk. It makes you look less pale. And Eleanor," she paused at the door, "do try to smile. Men do not wish to marry statues, no matter how prettily carved." When the door closed, Eleanor finally allowed herself to breathe. She moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Lord Ashford, she had met him twice, both times under Mrs. Pemberton's watchful eye. He was 43, a widower with 2 grown children, older than Eleanor herself. He was not unkind, but there was something in his eyes, a coldness, a calculation, that made her skin prickle with unease. "Miss Eleanor?" The soft voice belonged to Mary, the housemaid who had become Eleanor's only confidant in this house. "I've drawn your bath. Mrs. Pemberton wants you dressed by 6. Eleanor turned, managing a small smile for the girl who was only a year younger than herself. "Thank you, Mary." As she bathed and dressed, Eleanor's mind wandered to the fragments of memory she clung to like precious jewels. Her father, standing in his study with papers spread before him, his face grave. "Eleanor, my darling, if anything should happen to me, remember, you are stronger than you know, and the truth." But he had never finished that sentence. 3 days later, he was found dead in that same study, a pistol in his hand, and a note that declared financial ruin. Her mother had lasted only 6 months longer. her heart simply giving out from grief. The blue silk dress transformed her into someone else, someone polished and presentable, a commodity to be traded in the marriage market. Eleanor stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the young woman who looked back. Where had that girl gone, the one who had raced through meadows and dreamed of adventure? At precisely 7 o'clock, Lord Ashford arrived. Eleanor descended the stairs with practiced grace, her hand light on the banister. He stood in the foyer, tall and distinguished in his evening clothes, his silver-streaked hair immaculately groomed. Beside him stood his son, a young man of 25 with his father's sharp features and an expression of barely concealed boredom. "Miss Hartwell," Lord Ashford said, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips, "you look exquisite." "You are too kind, my lord," Eleanor replied, the words automatic. The evening that followed was a performance. They dined in the grand dining room, Mrs. Pemberton presiding over the meal like a general commanding troops. Lord Ashford spoke of his estates, his investments, his position in Parliament. He spoke of his late wife with the same tone one might use to discuss a valuable painting, appreciative of her pedigree, her connections, her ability to host flawless dinner parties. "I require a wife who understands the responsibilities of her position," he said, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Someone who can manage a household, represent the family with dignity, and provide companionship." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. She understood what he meant. She would be decorative, obedient and grateful. In return, she would have security, a name, a place in society. It was more than many women in her position could hope for. But as the evening wore on, Eleanor felt something inside her begin to crack. Was this truly all that remained of her life, to be passed from one guardian to another, never choosing, never living, simply existing in whatever role was assigned to her? "The engagement will be announced at the Pemberton ball next week," Mrs. Pemberton declared as Lord Ashford prepared to depart. "It will be the event of the season." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Next week, 7 days, until her fate was sealed. That night, alone in her room, Eleanor stood at the window and watched the rain fall over London. Somewhere in this vast city, people were living lives of their own choosing. Somewhere, there were women who laughed freely, who made decisions, who were more than ornaments in someone else's design. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep into her palm. "I am stronger than I know," she whispered, her father's words a fragile lifeline in the darkness. But as she climbed into bed and closed her eyes, Eleanor could not shake the feeling that she was disappearing, piece by piece, into a future that would erase her entirely. The Pemberton ball loomed ahead, a glittering trap from which there would be no escape. The night of the Pemberton ball arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if London itself had conspired to make the evening perfect. Ashford House blazed with light, every window glowing like a jewel box opened to display its treasures. Carriages lined the street, depositing the cream of society onto the steps where liveried footmen stood at attention. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across walls draped in ivory silk, and hothouse flowers filled the air with their cloying sweetness. Eleanor stood in the center of it all, feeling like a sacrifice dressed for the altar. Her gown was white, Mrs. Pemberton's choice, naturally, with delicate lace at the shoulders and seed pearls sewn into the bodice. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that pulled at her scalp, and around her neck hung a simple strand of pearls, the only piece of her mother's jewelry that hadn't been sold to pay debts. "You look like a bride already," Mrs. Pemberton said with satisfaction, adjusting Eleanor's gloves. "Lord Ashford will make the announcement at midnight. Until then, you will dance, you will smile, and you will give no one any reason to question this match. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton." The evening began as all such evenings did. A blur of introductions, forced smiles and meaningless pleasantries. Eleanor danced with Lord Ashford twice, his hand firm at her waist, His conversation focused on the wedding arrangements he had already begun to make. She would be married in St. George's, Hanover Square. They would honeymoon at his estate in Yorkshire. She would dismiss her personal maid and accept the servants he had selected. "I prefer my household run with precision," he said as they turned through a waltz. "My late wife understood this perfectly. I trust you will adapt quickly." "I will do my best, my lord," Eleanor replied, the words tasting like ash. As the clock approached 11, Eleanor found herself standing near the refreshment table, grateful for a moment's respite. She watched the dancers whirl past, their faces flushed with wine and pleasure, and felt a profound sense of disconnection, as if she were watching a play in which she had been given a role she never auditioned for. "Miss Hartwell?" A young woman approached, her expression friendly. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Miss Charlotte Ashford, Lord Ashford's niece." Eleanor recognized her. She'd been seated at dinner the previous week, though they had not spoken. Charlotte was perhaps 20, with fair hair and a pretty heart-shaped face that seemed designed for smiling, but there was something in her eyes, a sharpness that belied her sweet demeanor. "How lovely to meet you properly," Eleanor said, managing a smile. "I wanted to welcome you to the family," Charlotte continued, linking her arm through Eleanor's with presumed familiarity. "It must be quite overwhelming, all of this. And to think, just a few years ago, you were living in such different circumstances." The comment landed like a slap, though Charlotte's tone remained pleasant. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My circumstances have indeed changed," she said carefully. "Oh, I meant no offense," Charlotte said quickly, though her eyes glittered with something that suggested otherwise. "It's actually quite romantic, isn't it? Like something from a novel. The orphaned girl, rescued from poverty by a noble lord, though I suppose some might say it's rather convenient." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance to the ballroom. Lady Pemberton's voice rose above the music, shrill with distress. "My necklace, my diamond necklace is gone!" The orchestra stuttered to a halt. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned toward Lady Pemberton, who stood with her hand at her throat, her face pale with shock. "It was here just moments ago," she cried. "I felt it at my neck when I entered the ballroom. Someone has stolen it." Mrs. Pemberton rushed to her sister-in-law's side, her face a mask of concern and fury. "Are you certain? Perhaps it simply came unclasped." "I am not a fool, Margaret. The necklace has been stolen, and in my own home." Lady Pemberton's eyes swept the room, and Eleanor felt her stomach drop as that gaze landed on her. "Who has been near me this evening? Who has had the opportunity?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Eleanor became aware of eyes turning toward her, whispers beginning to circulate like poison through water. She stood frozen, Charlotte's arm still linked through hers, feeling the weight of suspicion settle over her like a shroud. "Miss Hartwell was standing quite close to you earlier, Aunt," Charlotte said, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. "I saw her near the card-room entrance, just where you were speaking with Lady Devonshire." Eleanor's breath caught. I was nowhere near." "The girl has no family, no fortune," someone murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "Perhaps she thought to secure her future by other means." "How dare you?" Eleanor said, finding her voice at last. "I have taken nothing. I would never—" Lord Ashford stepped forward, his face unreadable. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might defend her, might use his authority to silence these accusations. Instead, he looked at her with cold assessment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Miss Hartwell," he said slowly, "perhaps you would not object to having your person searched, to clear your name, of course." The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor stared at him, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. "You cannot be serious. You believe I would steal?" "I believe that the truth must be established," Lord Ashford replied, his tone measured. "If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear." Mrs. Pemberton appeared at Eleanor's side, her fingers digging into Eleanor's arm like talons. "Come, Eleanor, let us resolve this matter quickly and quietly." But there would be nothing quiet about it. As Mrs. Pemberton began to lead Eleanor from the ballroom, Lady Pemberton's voice rang out again. "Search her now! I will not have a thief under my roof a moment longer than necessary." 2 footmen moved to block the doorway. Eleanor felt panic rising in her throat, her vision beginning to narrow. This could not be happening. This was a nightmare from which she would surely wake. "Check her reticule," Charlotte suggested helpfully, "and perhaps her gloves. Diamonds can be concealed in so many clever ways." Mrs. Pemberton snatched Eleanor's small beaded reticule and upended it onto a nearby table. A handkerchief, a few coins, nothing more. But as the contents scattered, something else fell. A single diamond earring, glittering accusingly under the chandelier light. "That's not mine," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've never seen it before. Someone put it there." "The evidence speaks for itself," Lord Ashford said, and his voice was ice. He turned to Mrs. Pemberton, his expression one of profound distaste. "Madam, I must inform you that I cannot proceed with an engagement to a woman of questionable character. Whatever arrangement we had discussed is hereby dissolved." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. Around her the whispers grew louder, more vicious. Thief, opportunist, fortune hunter. The faces that had smiled at her earlier now looked upon her with contempt or pity, and Eleanor could not decide which was worse. "Please," she said, hating the desperation in her voice, "please, someone must believe me. I have done nothing wrong." But no one moved to her defense. Even Mrs. Pemberton had stepped away, her face twisted with fury and humiliation. Eleanor stood alone in the center of the ballroom, her white dress now seeming like a mockery, her carefully arranged hair and borrowed pearls suddenly pathetic rather than elegant. It was then that the doors to the ballroom opened, and a late arrival entered. A tall figure in impeccable evening dress, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. The Duke of Ravensmere had arrived, and his sharp grey eyes took in the scene with immediate comprehension. "What," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "is the meaning of this spectacle?" The Duke of Ravensmere's presence commanded instant attention. Christopher Ashton, the Duke of Ravensmere, was a man whose reputation preceded him. A widower of 3 years, he had retreated from society after his wife's death, managing his vast estates with ruthless efficiency and appearing in London only when parliamentary duties demanded. He was 40 years old, though grief had etched lines around his eyes that made him seem older. His late wife, Catherine, had been beloved by all who knew her, and her loss had transformed him from a sociable nobleman into something harder, more solitary. "Your Grace," Mrs. Pemberton said, recovering her composure with visible effort, "how kind of you to join us. I'm afraid we are dealing with an unfortunate situation." "I can see that," Christopher said, his gaze moving to Eleanor, who stood trembling in the center of the room, her face drained of color. "What I cannot see is any justification for this public humiliation of a young woman." Lord Ashford stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace, I'm afraid Miss Hartwell has been caught in possession of stolen property. Lady Pemberton's diamond necklace has gone missing, and evidence was found in Miss Hartwell's reticule." Christopher's eyes narrowed. "Evidence? I see an earring on that table. Where is this necklace?" A moment of silence followed. Lady Pemberton's hand fluttered to her throat. "Well, it has not been recovered yet, but surely." "So you have accused this girl of theft, humiliated her before all of society, and yet the supposedly stolen item has not been found?" Christopher's voice was dangerously quiet. "That strikes me as remarkably poor logic." "The earring proves her guilt," Charlotte interjected, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Why else would she have it?" Christopher turned his attention to Charlotte, and something in his gaze made her step back. "And who are you to speak in this matter?" "Miss Charlotte Ashford, Your Grace, Lord Ashford's niece." "I see." Christopher looked back at Eleanor, who was staring at him with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "Miss Hartwell, do you know how that earring came to be in your possession?" Eleanor's voice shook as she answered. No, Your Grace. I have never seen it before this moment. Someone must have placed it there, but I cannot prove. Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting tears. Christopher studied her for a long moment, and something in her face, the genuine terror, the bewildered innocence, reminded him painfully of Catherine. His wife had possessed that same quality of transparent honesty, an inability to dissemble that had made her vulnerable in a world built on deception. I will not stand by while an innocent is condemned without evidence, Christopher said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. Lord Ashford, you shame yourself with this display. Mrs. Pemberton, you shame your house. Until Lady Pemberton's necklace is actually found, and until there is genuine proof of wrongdoing, I suggest you remember that accusations can destroy reputations, including your own. He crossed to Eleanor and offered his arm. Miss Hartwell, I believe you require some air. Allow me to escort you. Eleanor stared at him, unable to comprehend this sudden rescue. Your Grace, Come, he said gently, and something in his tone, a kindness beneath the authority, made her place her trembling hand on his arm. As Christopher led Eleanor through the crowd, which parted before them like water, Mrs. Pemberton found her voice. Your Grace, I must protest. The girl is my ward, and I cannot allow— Christopher turned, and the look he gave her could have frozen fire. Your ward? Then you have failed spectacularly in your duty to protect her. I am taking Miss Hartwell to my aunt, Lady Beatrice Ashton, who resides in Belgravia. She will provide proper care and shelter while this matter is investigated thoroughly. If you wish to contest this, I suggest you consult your solicitor. Good evening. The carriage ride through London's dark streets passed in a blur. Eleanor sat rigid on the velvet seat, her hands clenched in her lap, unable to speak or even think clearly. Christopher sat across from her, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the carriage lamps. Why? Eleanor finally whispered. Why would you help me? You don't know me. You have no reason to believe my innocence. Christopher was silent for a moment. My wife, he said at last, was falsely accused once before we married. A rival claimed she had spread malicious gossip. The accusation was baseless, but the damage was done. I watched her suffer the cruelty of society's judgment, and I swore then that I would never stand idle when I witnessed such injustice. He paused. And I looked into your eyes, Miss Hartwell. I saw fear and confusion, but I did not see guilt. Tears finally spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. I didn't take anything. I swear it, but no one will believe me now. My reputation is destroyed. Reputations can be rebuilt, Christopher said quietly, and the truth has a way of emerging given time. The carriage stopped before an elegant townhouse in Belgravia. Christopher helped Eleanor down and led her to the door, which was opened by a dignified butler who showed no surprise at the late hour or the distressed young woman on the Duke's arm. Graves, is my aunt still awake? Lady Beatrice is in the drawing-room, Your Grace. She mentioned she was expecting you. Christopher's lips quirked slightly. Of course she did. Lady Beatrice Ashton was 72 years old, with silver hair piled elegantly atop her head and eyes that missed nothing. She sat in a wing-back chair near the fire, a book in her lap, and looked up as Christopher entered with Eleanor. So, she said, setting the book aside, you've rescued another lost soul, Christopher. How very like you. Her gaze moved to Eleanor, sharp but not unkind. Come here, child. Let me look at you. Eleanor approached hesitantly. Lady Beatrice studied her with the intensity of a naturalist examining a rare specimen. Hartwell, she murmured. Eleanor Hartwell. Yes, I remember your father. Thomas Hartwell, wasn't it? Owned an estate in Derbyshire. Died under mysterious circumstances some 7 years ago. Eleanor's breath caught. You knew my father? I knew of him. He was involved in some business matter with the Ashford family, if memory serves. Something about mining rights or railway investments. Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. And now you find yourself accused of theft by the Ashfords. How very convenient. Christopher frowned. Aunt, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, my dear boy, that this may be about more than a missing necklace. Lady Beatrice rose and took Eleanor's hands. You're safe here, child. Tomorrow we will begin to unravel this mess. But tonight, you need rest. Graves, have Mrs. Cooper prepare the blue room. As the butler departed, Eleanor felt something inside her finally break. She had been holding herself together through sheer will, but Lady Beatrice's kindness, following Christopher's unexpected defence, was too much. She began to sob, great, shaking sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Lady Beatrice pulled her into an embrace, stroking her hair as one might comfort a child. There now, let it out. You've been very brave, but you don't have to be brave anymore. Not here. Christopher watched, feeling an unexpected tightness in his chest. He had not intended to become involved in anyone's troubles. Since Catherine's death, he had carefully maintained his distance from emotional entanglements. Yet something about Eleanor Hartwell had pierced his armor, perhaps her vulnerability, perhaps the injustice of her situation, or perhaps something else he was not yet ready to name. Over the following days, Eleanor slowly began to emerge from her shock. Lady Beatrice proved to be a formidable ally, sharp-minded and fiercely protective. She introduced Eleanor to her circle, a collection of intellectuals, artists and reformers who gathered weekly in her drawing room to discuss everything from women's suffrage to the latest scientific discoveries. Society, Lady Beatrice declared one afternoon, is far larger than the narrow-minded fools who populate Mayfair ballrooms. There are people in this city doing remarkable things, thinking remarkable thoughts. You've been living in a cage, my dear. It's time you discovered there's a whole world beyond its bars. It was at one of these gatherings that Eleanor met Dr. Elias Reed, a physician who had recently returned from studying in Vienna. He was 35, with kind brown eyes and an earnest manner that put Eleanor immediately at ease. "Lady Beatrice tells me you've had a difficult time," he said, offering her a cup of tea. "I hope you're finding some peace here." "I am," Eleanor said, surprised to find it was true. "Your aunt has been extraordinarily kind. She has a talent for collecting strays," Christopher said, appearing at Eleanor's side. There was warmth in his voice when he spoke of his aunt, a softness that transformed his usually stern features. Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of Christopher's presence. He called daily, ostensibly to check on the investigation into the missing necklace, but he often stayed for hours, joining the discussions in Lady Beatrice's drawing room or walking with Eleanor in the small garden behind the house. He spoke to her as an equal, asking her opinions on matters of politics and philosophy, listening intently to her answers. "You have a sharp mind," he said one afternoon as they walked among the autumn roses. "It's been wasted, keeping you confined to drawing rooms and needlework." "Women are not encouraged to exercise their minds," Eleanor replied. "We are meant to be decorative and agreeable." "My wife believed that was nonsense," Christopher said quietly. "She read voraciously, debated fiercely, and never apologized for her intelligence. I loved that about her." He paused, then added, "You remind me of her in some ways." Eleanor felt her heart skip. She had begun to recognize the feelings growing within her, a dangerous attraction to this man who had saved her, who saw her as more than an ornament or a burden. But he was a duke, far above her station, and he was still mourning his beloved wife. "The necklace has been found," Christopher announced one evening, his expression grim. "It was discovered in Charlotte Ashford's room, hidden in a hatbox." Eleanor gasped. Charlotte? But why would she? Jealousy, perhaps, or malice. Lord Ashford had apparently promised her a substantial dowry upon his remarriage, funds that would have come from his marriage settlement with you. With you disgraced, the engagement dissolved, and the dowry remained hers. Christopher's jaw tightened. She has confessed, though the family is attempting to keep the matter quiet. "Then I'm cleared," Eleanor whispered. "My name is restored." "Yes," Christopher said, and something in his eyes made Eleanor's breath catch. "You are free, Eleanor. Free to choose your own path forward." 3 weeks after the scandal, Lady Beatrice announced her intentions over breakfast. The Duchess of Marlborough is hosting a charity gala for the new women's hospital. We shall attend, and Eleanor shall be presented properly to society." Eleanor's teacup rattled against its saucer. "Lady Beatrice, I cannot possibly, after what happened—" "After what happened," Lady Beatrice interrupted firmly. "You were proven innocent. Charlotte Ashford has been sent to the family estate in Scotland in disgrace, and the Pembertons are the ones facing whispers, not you. It is time, my dear, for you to hold your head high and show London that you are not a victim to be pitied, but a young woman of character and intelligence." Christopher, who had joined them for breakfast, as had become his habit, nodded his agreement. "My aunt is right. Hiding will only allow the gossips to control the narrative. You must write your own story." Over the following week, Eleanor was transformed, not into the passive ornament Mrs. Pemberton had tried to create, but into something entirely her own. Lady Beatrice's modiste created gowns that were elegant but not ostentatious, in rich jewel tones that brought colour to Eleanor's complexion. More importantly, Lady Beatrice continued Eleanor's education, introducing her to books on philosophy, science, and social reform. "Intelligence," Lady Beatrice declared, "is the finest accessory a woman can wear." Dr. Reed became a frequent visitor, often bringing medical journals or books he thought might interest Eleanor. His attention was flattering, his conversation stimulating, and Eleanor found herself enjoying his company. He treated her with respect, asking her opinions on his work and listening thoughtfully to her responses. "You have a natural aptitude for understanding complex systems," he told her one afternoon. "Have you ever considered that you might contribute to medical research? Many of our greatest insights come from fresh perspectives." Christopher, observing these interactions, felt an unfamiliar sensation, something sharp and uncomfortable that he eventually recognized as jealousy. He had no claim on Eleanor, no right to feel possessive, yet watching her smile at Dr. Reed's compliments made his chest tighten with an emotion he thought he had buried with Catherine. The night of the Duchess of Marlborough's gala arrived with crisp November air and clear skies. Eleanor wore a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the green in her eyes, her hair arranged simply but elegantly. As she descended Lady Beatrice's stairs, Christopher, waiting in the foyer, felt his breath catch. "You look magnificent," he said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Eleanor blushed. "Thank you, Your Grace. I confess I'm terrified." "Then we shall be terrified together," he said, offering his arm. "Though I suspect you'll find you have more allies than you imagine." The Duchess of Marlborough's residence blazed with light and music. As they entered, Eleanor felt eyes turned toward her, whispers beginning. But Lady Beatrice swept forward with the confidence of a general leading troops, Christopher at Eleanor's side, and the whispers changed in tone, from malicious to curious, from condemning to reassessing. The Duchess herself approached, a formidable woman in her 60s with kind eyes. "Miss Hartwell, how delightful to finally meet you properly. Lady Beatrice has told me so much about your interest in our hospital project. I understand you have some innovative ideas about patient care." Eleanor blinked, surprised. Lady Beatrice had apparently been preparing the ground carefully. Yes, Your Grace. I've been reading about the work being done in Vienna, and I believe—" What followed was a genuine conversation about medical reform, sanitation, and the treatment of women patients. Other guests joined, drawn by the discussion, and Eleanor found herself at the center of an engaged circle. Her ideas met with interest rather than dismissal. Across the room, she glimpsed Mrs. Pemberton, who looked away quickly, her face tight with displeasure. Lord Ashford was also present, standing with a group of older gentlemen, his expression carefully neutral when his eyes met Eleanor's. "Miss Hartwell." The voice was cold, familiar. Eleanor turned to find Lord Ashford approaching, his posture rigid. "I see you have landed on your feet." "Through no assistance of yours, my lord," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I acted on the evidence presented," Lord Ashford said stiffly. "Any reasonable man would have done the same." A reasonable man, Christopher said, appearing at Eleanor's side, would have demanded actual proof before condemning an innocent woman. A reasonable man would have defended his betrothed rather than abandoning her at the first hint of scandal. Lord Ashford's face flushed. "Your Grace, I hardly think—" "No," Christopher interrupted, his voice like steel wrapped in silk. "You did not think. You acted out of cowardice and self-interest. Miss Hartwell is well rid of you." The confrontation drew attention. Guests paused in their conversations, watching with barely concealed interest. Eleanor felt exposed, but also something else, a fierce pride that Christopher would defend her so publicly. Lord Ashford's eyes narrowed. "I see. The Duke of Ravensmere has found a new project. How charitable of you, Your Grace, to take in strays. Though one wonders at your motives." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Christopher went very still, and Eleanor recognized the danger in that stillness. "You will apologize," Christopher said quietly, "or you will meet me." The room fell silent. A challenge, not quite a duel, but close enough to make the threat clear. Lord Ashford paled, realizing he had overstepped. I meant no offense to Miss Hartwell," he said quickly. "I merely—" "Then you will say so. To her, not to me." Lord Ashford turned to Eleanor, his pride clearly warring with his sense of self-preservation. "Miss Hartwell, I apologize if my words caused offense. That was not my intention." It was a hollow apology, but Eleanor accepted it with grace. "Thank you, Lord Ashford. I hope you find happiness in your future endeavors." The dismissal was elegant and final. Lord Ashford bowed stiffly and retreated, and the conversations around them resumed with renewed energy. Eleanor knew that by tomorrow all of London would be discussing this encounter, but the narrative would be different now. She was not the disgraced charity case, but the wronged innocent, defended by a duke and embraced by the Duchess of Marlborough herself. As the evening progressed, Dr. Reed found Eleanor on the terrace, where she had stepped out for air. "That was quite a scene," he said with a smile. "You handled it beautifully." "I'm not sure I handled anything," Eleanor admitted. "The Duke is clearly very protective of you," Dr. Reed observed. His expression was thoughtful, perhaps a touch wistful. "Miss Hartwell, Eleanor, if I may, I wonder if you might allow me to call on you. Properly, I mean, with intentions." Eleanor's heart skipped, but not with the excitement such a proposal should inspire. Dr. Reed was kind, intelligent, respectful, everything a woman should want. Yet when she thought of him, she felt only warm friendship. When she thought of Christopher, "Dr. Reed, I'm honored," she began carefully, "but I think you need time," he finished gently. "Of course, you've been through a tremendous ordeal. I simply wanted you to know that when you're ready, I would very much like to explore whether we might suit." Before Eleanor could respond, Christopher appeared in the doorway. "Forgive the interruption, but the Duchess wishes to introduce Eleanor to Lady Ashworth, who runs a school for girls in Bloomsbury. She's looking for someone to help develop their curriculum." Dr. Reed bowed. "Of course, Miss Hartwell. We'll speak again soon." As he departed, Christopher moved to stand beside Eleanor at the terrace railing. "Dr. Reed seems quite taken with you." "He's a good man," Eleanor said carefully. "He is," Christopher agreed. There was a long pause. "Eleanor, He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "You should know that I've been making inquiries about your father's death. There are some irregularities in the official account. The supposed debts, the suicide note, my investigators believe they may have been fabricated." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes wide. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your father may have been murdered, and his death made to look like suicide, and I believe it may be connected to the Ashford family, specifically to a disputed inheritance involving mining rights in Derbyshire." Christopher's expression was grave. "Eleanor, I think you may be the lost heiress to the Thornbury estate. Your father's estate, which was claimed by the Ashfords after his death." The world seemed to tilt. Eleanor gripped the railing, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. Mrs. Pemberton said—" Mrs. Pemberton is Lord Ashford's cousin, Christopher said gently. She had every reason to keep you ignorant and powerless, but the truth is emerging, Eleanor. You are not the penniless orphan they made you believe you were. You are the rightful heir to a considerable fortune. Eleanor stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Tears of shock, of grief for her father, of rage at the injustice. Christopher pulled her into his arms, holding her as she wept, and Eleanor realized that this, his strength, his warmth, his unwavering support, was what she had been seeking all along. "What do I do?" she whispered against his chest. "You fight," Christopher said firmly, "and you win, and I will be beside you every step of the way." The revelation of Eleanor's true identity sent shockwaves through London society. Christopher's investigators had uncovered a web of deception that stretched back 7 years, forged documents, bribed officials, and a conspiracy that had robbed Eleanor of her birthright. The Thornbury estate in Derbyshire, with its valuable coal mining rights, had been worth a fortune. Lord Ashford's father had been Thomas Hartwell's business partner, and upon Thomas's convenient death, the Ashfords had claimed the estate through manipulated contracts and Eleanor's supposed illegitimacy. "They destroyed my father," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with fury as she sat in Lady Beatrice's drawing room, surrounded by legal documents. "They murdered him and stole everything, then had the audacity to take me in as a charity case, planning to marry me off to erase any future claims I might make." Christopher, seated across from her, nodded grimly. "Lord Ashford needed you married and under his control. As your husband, he would have had legal authority over any assets you might later claim. When Charlotte sabotaged the engagement out of greed, she inadvertently freed you." Lady Beatrice poured tea with steady hands, though her eyes blazed with anger. "The question now is what you intend to do, my dear. We have enough evidence to bring criminal charges. The Ashfords will be ruined." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, staring at the documents that proved her father's innocence and her own stolen legacy. She thought of the years she had spent believing herself worthless, dependent on the charity of the very people who had destroyed her family. The rage was there, hot and justified, but beneath it was something else, a deep weariness with the world of deception and cruelty that had shaped her life. "I want justice," she said finally. "But I don't want revenge to consume me. My father wouldn't have wanted that." She looked up at Christopher, her eyes clear and determined. "I want the estate returned. I want the truth made public, but I don't want to spend years in courts fighting battles that will only make me bitter. I want to live, truly live, for the first time in my life." Christopher felt something shift in his chest. Admiration, certainly, but also something deeper, more profound. This woman, who had every right to seek vengeance, was choosing grace instead. Catherine would have done the same. The thought of his late wife no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Instead, he felt a gentle warmth, as if Catherine were giving him permission to move forward, to open his heart again. "Then we'll settle it quickly," he said. "I'll speak to Lord Ashford personally. He'll return the estate and provide financial restitution, or face criminal prosecution and complete social ruin. Given the evidence, he'll choose the former." The meeting took place 3 days later in Christopher's study. Lord Ashford arrived with his solicitor, his face haggard, his earlier arrogance completely absent. The evidence was laid before him. Witness statements, financial records, the original contracts that proved Thomas Hartwell's ownership of the Thornbury estate. "You have 2 choices," Christopher said coldly. "You can return Miss Hartwell's inheritance in full, along with 7 years of accumulated profits from the mining operations, plus an additional sum for damages. Or you can face criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and quite possibly murder. Your family name will be destroyed, your assets seized, and you will likely spend your remaining years in prison." Lord Ashford's solicitor whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, Lord Ashford nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'll sign whatever documents are necessary, but I want it known. I had no part in Thomas Hartwell's death. That was my father's doing. I merely inherited the situation. You inherited stolen property. Eleanor said, speaking for the first time. She had insisted on being present despite Christopher's concerns. And you perpetuated the lie. You took me into your home, not out of charity, but to control me. You would have married me to secure your theft permanently. That makes you complicit, Lord Ashford. He could not meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Miss Hartwell, truly. Your apology means nothing to me, Eleanor replied. But your signature on those documents does. Within a week, the legal transfers were complete. Eleanor Hartwell was restored to her rightful position as the heiress of Thornbury. The estate itself, with its grand manor house and extensive grounds, was hers, along with a fortune that made her one of the wealthiest unmarried women in England. Society's reaction was predictable. Those who had shunned her now clamoured for invitations to call. Mrs. Pemberton attempted to reconcile, claiming she had been deceived by Lord Ashford, but Eleanor refused to receive her. The Pembertons, tainted by association with the scandal, retreated to their country estate in disgrace. "You're free now," Lady Beatrice said one evening as they sat together in the drawing-room. "Truly free. You have fortune, position, and the world at your feet. What will you do with it?" Eleanor had been thinking about this question constantly. The obvious path would be to remain in London, to take her place in society, perhaps to make an advantageous marriage. Dr. Reed had renewed his suit, and there were others. Younger sons of noble families, wealthy merchants, even a widowed earl. She could have her pick. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see London ballrooms or society gatherings. She saw the Derbyshire hills of her childhood, the estate her father had loved. She saw the mining villages where families struggled, where children worked in dangerous conditions, where her wealth could make a real difference. "I want to go home," she said, "to Thornbury. I want to see the estate properly managed, the workers treated fairly. I want to build a school, perhaps a hospital. I want to do something meaningful with this fortune, not just spend it on gowns and jewels." Lady Beatrice smiled. "Your father would be very proud of you, my dear." Christopher, who had been standing by the window, turned. "Derbyshire is quite remote. You'll be isolated from society." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "I've had quite enough of society." "You'll need someone to help you manage the estate," Christopher continued, his tone carefully neutral. "The mining operations alone require significant oversight. And there are legal matters, tenant disputes, investment decisions." Eleanor looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "Are you offering your assistance, Your Grace?" Christopher crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. Lady Beatrice, with remarkable discretion, suddenly remembered an urgent matter that required her attention elsewhere. "Eleanor," Christopher said, his voice rough with emotion, "I am offering far more than assistance. I am offering my heart, my life, my future. I know it's soon, I know you've just regained your freedom and may not wish to surrender it again. But I must tell you, I have fallen in love with you. Deeply, irrevocably in love." Eleanor's breath caught. "Christopher, you are nothing like Catherine," he continued, "and yet you possess the same qualities I loved in her. Strength, intelligence, compassion, courage. I thought I would never feel this way again, that my heart had been buried with my wife. But you've awakened something in me I thought was dead. You've made me want to live again, not just exist." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I've loved you since the moment you defended me in that ballroom. But I was afraid you saw me as a project, a duty, someone to rescue." "I see you as my equal," Christopher said fiercely, "as my partner, as the woman I want to spend the rest of my life beside. Marry me, Eleanor. Come to Derbyshire, manage your estate, build your schools and hospitals, and let me help you, let me love you, let me be the man who stands beside you as you change the world." Eleanor pulled him up and kissed him, pouring 7 years of loneliness, fear, and suppressed hope into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, both were crying, and both were smiling. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Yes, I'll marry you. But Christopher, I won't be a traditional duchess. I intend to be very involved in managing my estate, in social reform, in—" "I wouldn't have it any other way," Christopher interrupted, kissing her again. "I don't want a traditional duchess. I want you, exactly as you are." Lady Beatrice returned at precisely the right moment, her eyes twinkling. "I assume congratulations are in order." "They are," Christopher said, his arm around Eleanor's waist. "Though I suspect you knew this would happen all along." "I had my hopes," Lady Beatrice admitted. "Now we must plan a wedding, something elegant but not ostentatious, and certainly not at St. George's, Hanover Square." Eleanor laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Definitely not St. George's. Perhaps at Thornbury, in the estate chapel." "Perfect," Christopher agreed. "A new beginning, in the place where you belong." The announcement of their engagement caused another sensation, but Eleanor found she no longer cared what society thought. She had Christopher, she had Lady Beatrice, she had her restored legacy and a future filled with purpose. The opinions of people who had abandoned her in her darkest hour meant nothing. Dr. Reed called to offer his congratulations, his smile genuine despite any personal disappointment. "I'm happy for you both," he said. "The Duke is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Eleanor replied warmly. "And I hope we'll remain friends, Dr. Reed. I'll need a good physician in Derbyshire if you'd ever consider relocating." His eyes lit up. "I would consider it very seriously. The countryside needs qualified doctors far more than London does." Agree. As Eleanor packed her belongings to leave Lady Beatrice's house, she would stay at Christopher's London residence until the wedding. She found herself standing at the window, looking out over the city that had been both her prison and her salvation. "Ready?" Christopher asked, appearing in the doorway. Eleanor turned to him, her smile radiant. "Ready," she said. "Let's go home." Spring came to Derbyshire with an explosion of colour that took Eleanor's breath away. 6 months had passed since her wedding to Christopher in the small chapel at Thornbury, with only Lady Beatrice, Dr. Reed, and a handful of close friends in attendance. It had been everything Eleanor had dreamed of: intimate, meaningful, and filled with genuine joy rather than social obligation. Now, standing on the terrace of Thornbury Manor, Eleanor watched the sun rise over the hills her father had once walked. The estate had been transformed under her management. The manor house, which had fallen into disrepair under the Ashfords' neglect, had been lovingly restored. But more importantly, the lives of those who depended on the estate had been transformed as well. "Mrs. Ashton says the new school is ready for inspection," Christopher said, joining her on the terrace and wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Eleanor leaned back against him, marvelling at how natural this intimacy had become, how completely she had shed the fearful, constrained girl she had once been. "I can hardly believe it's finished," Eleanor said. 6 months ago, it was just a dream." The school stood at the edge of the main village, a sturdy stone building with large windows that let in abundant light. It would educate the children of the mining families, both boys and girls, which had caused some controversy among the more traditional residents. But Eleanor had been firm. Every child deserved education, regardless of gender or social class. "Your father would be proud," Christopher murmured against her hair. "You've done more for this estate in 6 months than the Ashfords did in 7 years. Eleanor had done far more than build a school. She had improved safety conditions in the mines, implementing measures Dr. Reed had suggested after touring the facilities. She had built new cottages for the workers, replacing the cramped, unsanitary hovels they had lived in. She had established a lending library, a community centre, and a small clinic where Dr. Reed, who had indeed relocated to Derbyshire, provided medical care. "I had help," Eleanor said, turning in Christopher's arms to face him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." It was true. Christopher had used his influence to navigate the legal and political obstacles that might have stymied Eleanor's reforms. He had connected her with engineers, architects, and social reformers. But more than that, he had been her partner in every sense, discussing plans late into the night, visiting the villages with her, listening to the concerns of the workers, and helping to find solutions. Their marriage had become a true partnership, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Christopher had estates of his own, but he spent most of his time at Thornbury, managing his other properties through capable stewards and travelling to London only when parliamentary duties required. "The Duchess of Marlborough has written again," Christopher said, as they walked back inside for breakfast. "She wants you to speak at the Women's Reform Conference in London next month. She says your work here could serve as a model for other estates." Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. Public speaking still intimidated her, but she had learned that important work often required stepping outside one's comfort zone. "I'll do it," she said. "If it helps other women see what's possible, if it improves lives beyond Thornbury, then I must." After breakfast, they rode out to inspect the school. The village children had gathered outside, their faces scrubbed clean, their eyes bright with excitement. Many of them had never imagined they would receive an education. For the girls especially, this represented an opportunity their mothers had never had. "Miss Eleanor, your Grace!" A young girl ran forward, clutching a slate. "Look, I can write my name. Sarah Thompson, that's me." Eleanor dismounted and knelt beside the child, examining the carefully formed letters. "That's beautiful, Sarah. And soon you'll be writing stories, reading books, learning about the whole wide world." The girl's mother stood nearby, tears in her eyes. "Bless you, my lady, my Sarah, she's so bright, always asking questions, wanting to know how things work. Now she'll have her chance." These moments made everything worthwhile: the long hours, the resistance from traditionalists, the exhausting work of transformation. Eleanor was changing lives, giving children opportunities that would ripple forward through generations. Dr. Reed emerged from the clinic, his medical bag in hand. "Good morning, Your Graces. I've just been to see old Mr. Patterson. His lung condition is improving with the better ventilation in the new cottages. He says he can breathe easier than he has in years." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said warmly. Dr. Reed had become a dear friend to both her and Christopher. He had also, she noted with pleasure, been paying considerable attention to Miss Alice Winters, the young woman Eleanor had hired to teach at the school. Alice was the daughter of a country vicar, educated and passionate about learning, and the affection between her and Dr. Reed was becoming increasingly obvious. "Will you join us for dinner tonight?" Christopher asked. "Lady Beatrice is visiting, and she's been asking after you. I believe she wants to discuss your paper on mining-related respiratory illnesses." Dr. Reed's face lit up. "I would be delighted, and perhaps Miss Winters might join us as well. She's been helping me document the health improvements in the village, and her observations have been quite insightful." Eleanor and Christopher exchanged knowing glances. "Of course," Eleanor said. "We'd be happy to have her." That evening, Thornbury Manor's dining room was filled with warmth and laughter. Lady Beatrice, who had made the journey from London despite her age, held court at one end of the table, regaling them with stories of the latest parliamentary debates. Dr. Reed and Miss Winters sat together, their conversation animated, their mutual admiration evident. Christopher sat at the head of the table, his hand occasionally reaching for Eleanor's, his eyes reflecting contentment Eleanor had never seen in their early days. "I received a letter from Mrs. Pemberton," Lady Beatrice announced during dessert. "She's attempting to rehabilitate her reputation by suddenly becoming interested in charitable works. She asked if she might visit Thornbury to learn from dear Eleanor's example." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I hope you declined on my behalf." "I did indeed," Lady Beatrice confirmed. "Some people deserve second chances. Others have squandered too many already. Mrs. Pemberton falls into the latter category." "What of Lord Ashford, Doctor?" Reed asked. "I heard he's left England entirely." Christopher nodded. "He's relocated to the continent. Italy, I believe. The scandal destroyed what remained of his reputation. His son has taken over management of the family estates, and is apparently attempting to repair the damage his father and grandfather caused. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in Lord Ashford's downfall, but neither did she feel pity. He had made his choices, and now he lived with the consequences. She had made peace with the past, choosing to focus her energy on building a better future rather than dwelling on old grievances. After dinner, Eleanor and Christopher walked in the garden, the spring evening soft and fragrant around them. The moon was rising over the hills, casting silver light across the landscape. "Are you happy?" Christopher asked, pulling Eleanor close. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Eleanor replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about that girl standing in the Pemberton ballroom, accused and alone, and I can hardly believe she was me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about myself, was wrong. I thought I was powerless, worthless, dependent on others' charity, but I was none of those things. I was simply waiting to discover who I truly was." "And who are you?" Christopher asked softly. Eleanor considered the question. "I'm Thomas Hartwell's daughter. I'm the mistress of Thornbury. I'm a woman who believes in justice, in education, in using privilege to lift others up. I'm someone who was broken and rebuilt herself stronger, and I'm your wife, your partner, your equal." Christopher kissed her, deep and tender. "You're also the woman I love more than life itself, the woman who taught me that it's possible to love again, to live again, to find joy after loss." They stood together in the moonlight, two people who had found each other in the midst of scandal and injustice, who had built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate sorrows. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, "about expanding the school. Perhaps building a secondary school for older students, offering more advanced education. And I'd like to establish a scholarship fund to send promising students to university, girls as well as boys." Christopher smiled. "Of course you have. You're never satisfied with what's been accomplished. You're always looking toward what comes next." "Is that a criticism?" Eleanor asked, though she was smiling too. "It's one of the many reasons I love you," Christopher replied. "You're going to change the world, Eleanor. One school, one mind, one village at a time, and I'm honored to be beside you while you do it." In London, in the drawing rooms and ballrooms Eleanor had once feared, people still spoke of her story, the orphaned girl who had been falsely accused, who had discovered she was an heiress, who had married a duke and transformed a neglected estate into a model of progressive reform. Some told it as a fairy tale, a romantic story of rescue and redemption. Others told it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and greed. But Eleanor knew the truth was more complex than either version. Her story was not about being rescued, it was about rescuing herself. It was about discovering that the cage she had lived in was never locked, that she had always possessed the strength to break free. She had simply needed to believe it. As spring turned to summer, Thornbury flourished. The school thrived, with children who had never held a book now reading fluently. The mines operated safely and profitably, with workers treated as human beings rather than expendable resources. The village became known throughout Derbyshire as a place of opportunity and hope. And in the manor house, Eleanor and Christopher built a life filled with purpose, passion, and profound partnership. They were not a traditional duke and duchess. They were something better. They were equals, allies, lovers, and friends. They were two people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk together into the light. On a warm June evening, Eleanor stood once more on the terrace, watching the sun set over the hills. She thought of her father, hoping he could see what she had built with the legacy he had left her. She thought of the girl she had been, frightened and powerless in the Pemberton ballroom, and she thought of the woman she had become, strong, purposeful, free. Christopher joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor smiled, turning to face the man she loved, the future they were building together, the life she had chosen rather than accepted. "I'm thinking," she said, "that I've finally bloomed exactly where I was meant to be planted, and it's more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed Eleanor and Christopher's journey, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional historical dramas. And don't forget to tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Until next time, remember that your true story is always worth discovering, no matter how long it takes to find it.